Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Ellison, and I'm the chair of the Council's Elections and Rules Committee, and I'm going to call the order of this regular meeting of the committee. So joining me at the dais are Councilmembers Palmisano, Johnson, Goodman, Schrader, Cunningham. I always just sort of have like these brain freezes. So,
Fletcher.
Councilmember Fletcher and Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Reich. So thank you for that. That is a quorum of the committee, and so we will, start the committee. Colleagues, we have 3 items on the agenda today. First, we have the final report of the 2018 midterm elections. Second, we have an initial report on plans for the 2020 presidential election. And third, we have the appointment of an assistant clerk to be confirmed by the City Council. So our first item is to receive the final report for the 2018 midterm elections. Here to present the report is our clerk, Casey Carl. Good morning, Mr. Carl.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as City Clerk. And on behalf of the Elections and Voter Services team, who's with us in the audience, I am pleased to present the report finalizing the 2018 gubernatorial election. As we know in retrospect, the 2018 midterm was a significant election. As shown on this slide, voter turnout in the last year's election was the highest achieved in more than a century. According to the United States Election Project, a total of 49.3% of the nation's electorate participated, representing more than 116 million ballots across all states. Here at home, Secretary of State Steve Simon noted a 64.3% turnout, which he indicates is the highest level of participation for a midterm election in state history. Minneapolis, as the largest city in the state, certainly contributed mightily to Minnesota's first in the nation turnout last year. We achieved a 67.7% turnout for last year's general election, which represented 207,114 ballots. On balance, our local turnout exceeded the averages for both the state of Minnesota and the entire nation. As a consequence of this significant level of participation, Minneapolis led the nation in terms of engagement and turnout in the 2018 midterm. This slide also shows that the other top 5 turnout cities from last year's midterm election. Interestingly enough, all of the top-ranked cities for turnout are north of the 40th parallel, located in the nation's colder region, so perhaps cooler climates encourage greater participation from voters. I'd also note that the lowest turnout cities are located in the more southern, hotter areas of the nation. Of course, midterm elections aren't generally known for high levels of participation, but that certainly wasn't the case in 2018. Last year's primary was the first since 2010 to be headlined by an open competitive race for governor. It also included several competitive races down the ballot. And as a result, the turnout for the 2018 primary was nearly double the rate compared to 2010, which was the last open competitive primary for governor's race. In the primary alone, Minneapolis achieved a 41% turnout, which was the highest engagement for a primary since 1970. For the general election, Minnesota was one of 5 states to achieve overall turnout that exceeded the national average of 50% voter turnout. In rank order from lowest to highest then, those states included Wisconsin with 61.2%, Oregon with 61.5%, Montana with 62.1%, Colorado with 62.7%, and leading the nation, the state of Minnesota with 64.3% voter turnout. It's been said before that Minnesota is the votingest state in the nation, and Minnesota certainly claimed that title again in 2018, and Minneapolis is its votingest city. This slide dives a little bit deeper into the city's turnout data from the 2018 midterm general election. This is a heat-coded map, so the darker colors reflect those precincts that had higher levels of participation. Lighter areas reflect lesser voter turnout. Of its total registered voter base, the city of Minneapolis achieved a turnout of 76%. That's an incredible achievement for a midterm, as I have said. It's more reflective of and actually on par with turnout typically achieved in a presidential election. In fact, looking only at registered voter turnout, Minneapolis achieved an approximate 76 turnout in 2018, which was only 3 points lower than the total registered voter turnout for the 2016 presidential election, when we had 79% turnout. So again, an incredible showing for a midterm election. Participation is measured differently, however, by states in order to account for the total potential eligible voting pool rather than just registered voters. And this has the effect of dampening the numbers a bit to adjust for that range of the potentially eligible voter base who aren't registered and who didn't vote. So looking at that estimated total eligible voting population, Minneapolis had an approximate 68% turnout last year. But again, that's just 5 points lower than the turnout that we achieved in the 2016 presidential election. So regardless of which way we use to measure our turnout, the city of Minneapolis had an incredible level of participation last year. And consistent with elections over multiple prior years and over different election cycles, turnout in Minneapolis was highest in those wards and precincts located in the western and southern parts of the city, primarily in Ward 7 and 13. As shown here, the 5 highest turnout precincts were, first, Ward 7, Precinct 1C, the Bryn Mawr neighborhood, with 89.4% turnout of its voters. Ward 11, Precinct 5, in the Page Field neighborhoods had 88.8%, and that was followed by Precincts 3, 5, and 12 in Ward 13, which encompassed the Fulton and Linden Hills neighborhoods. And again, as consistent in previous elections over multiple years, turnout was lowest in wards and precincts to the north. As shown here, the 5 lowest turnout precincts were Ward 12, Precinct 7, with 54.9%, Ward 4, Precinct 3, the McKinley neighborhood, with 54.3%, and then Precincts 2, 3, and 8 in Ward 5, which encompassed the Jordan, Willard Hay, and Hawthorne neighborhoods. So as I have reported to you in prior years, you can see that there's a fairly stark divide across the city, with heavy engagement, participation, and turnout among the western and southern areas, and much less engagement, participation, and turnout in the north and in certain areas immediately to the south and east of the downtown core. This division is troubling to us, and the Elections and Voter Services Division has continued to work over many years to improve our outreach, our engagement and education initiatives with community partners in these areas. Some of these areas are highlighted in the report before you, and others will be discussed as part of our initial plans to prepare for the upcoming 2020 presidential election. 2018 could rightly be called the year of early voting. Of course, in Minnesota, we wouldn't call it that. We would say it's the year of absentee balloting. Under the umbrella of absentee balloting, Minnesota offers several varieties which enable voters to cast ballots prior to Election Day. Most notable amongst these forms are the vote by mail and early in person. Over the years, voter awareness of and interest in absentee balloting has definitely increased, as clearly reflected on this slide. In fact, in the 28-year period between 1990 and 2018, participation due to absentee balloting increased a whopping 1,094%. Just between the 2014 midterm and the 2018 midterm, participation because of absentee balloting increased 326%. This slide focuses a bit more on absentee participation levels from just the last 3 midterms. That's 2010 through 2018. And as you can see, the increase between 2010 and 2014 was an increase of 92%. But the increase between 2014 and 2018 was more than 300%. While there is not conclusive data explaining this dramatic increase in early voting, I believe it is reasonable to assume that several recent changes in state law, coupled with our own local initiatives, have been contributing factors. First, as you know, in 2014, the state enacted no excuse absentee balloting, which ended the long-standing prior mandate which required voters to choose from amongst a handful of state-permitted excuses in order to request an absentee ballot. We saw a spike in absentee participation that year, almost doubling the rate of participation via absentee from the 2010 midterm. Second, in 2016, the state enacted direct balloting, which takes place during the final 7 days prior to Election Day. Direct balloting is the way that Minnesota refers to what other states call true early voting. Under direct balloting, a voter who chooses to cast a ballot prior to Election Day in person at the clerk's office is given the exact same treatment as voters at the polls on Election Day. They have the same security and protections afforded to them by our automatic tabulators. This is not the same treatment that voters get when they use the traditional absentee balloting methods. After direct balloting was enacted, we again saw an even bigger spike in early participation, and that trend has repeated in the 2018 midterm. In fact, based on projected turnout, the city, with strong support from the mayor and council, opted to open additional satellite early vote centers last year to provide greater access and convenience to all voters. The use of multiple early vote centers was pioneered in Minnesota by the city of Minneapolis in 2016, when a total of 4 satellite vote centers were operated throughout the entire 46-day absentee voting period. Last year, Minneapolis again offered a total of 4 satellite early vote centers, but only operated them during the final 7 days of absentee balloting tied to that direct balloting period. This slide shows the success of those multiple early vote centers in 2018. In addition to our downtown facility, which remained open and served voters throughout the entire 46-day absentee period, Minneapolis operated satellite vote centers in North Minneapolis at the Urban League, as in 2016, and in the east at the University of Minnesota campus, and in the south at the Regents Assembly Church. Interestingly, note the success of the South satellite location, which served 40% of all in-person early voters during that 7-day period. This was even more than the number that was cast at the downtown site during the same period. Data shows us that voters from precincts all across the city chose to go to our South satellite vote center to cast their ballots during that 7-day period, not just those from surrounding neighborhoods. So our satellite model has been very successful. This slide shows participation levels experienced at our downtown early vote center, which you'll recall was located right across the street from City Hall, both for the entire 46-day absentee balloting period shown in blue here, and also compared to just the final 7 days of direct balloting shown in red. So as you can see, we had almost the same level of turnout in the 7-day period of direct balloting as we did for the entire 40 days preceding. In fact, in just the final 7 days of early voting, the downtown site served the equivalent of 93% of the total number of voters who'd already cast ballots during that previous 40 days. Based on the success of this model, staff recommends that the city consider opening additional satellite voting centers in more locations in conjunction with the 2020 presidential election, but limit the operation of those satellite sites to just the 7 days tied to direct balloting. This will not only reduce the overall budget impact of those sites, but will still significantly increase the opportunity and access for all voters across the city. The other major form of early voting is vote by mail, which is the most traditional version and has been in existence the longest. It's the one that our voters are most familiar with. This slide shows that in 2018, vote by mail also experienced an increase in participation, continuing a years-long trend that echoes the same growing level of early in-person participation. In 2014, the first year of no-excuse absentee balloting, the city set a new record of early vote participation and had 8,061 vote-by-mail ballots cast. That increased almost 150% in the 2016 presidential election, when more than 19,000 vote-by-mail ballots were cast. And then another increase of 11% between 2016 and 2018, an increase in the level of vote-by-mail participation for a midterm election over and above what we had experienced in a presidential. With respect to the primaries in those years, there was an overall increase between 2014 and 2018 of more than 350%. So even as folks are taking advantage of the early in-person option and the greater convenience by multiple vote sites, we still are seeing that they are aware of and interested in the vote-by-mail option as well. So this council has heard before about the multiple advantages of early voting, some of which is detailed on the slide and much further in our report. But it is worth repeating that Minnesota provides its voters with distinct advantages when it comes to accessing the ballot. That's because our state has one of the longest absentee balloting periods in the nation. It starts 46 days prior to Election Day. That extended window of opportunity truly maximizes the convenience and choice afforded to all voters. The multiple forms of absentee balloting also give more options of choice to voters, whether they're out of town, overseas, in a hospital or healthcare facility, whether they choose to vote from the convenience and comfort of their home or early in person at the satellite vote centers. Our voters have significant amounts of time and options if they choose to participate. And now, with no excuse being required and the added convenience and security of direct balloting, Minneapolis has further expanded and built on ballot access through extended in-person service hours, which includes Saturdays and Sundays in the final 2 weeks leading to Election Day. So yes, 2018 was the year of absentee balloting, but it still didn't capture the most votes. Despite these added conveniences and the expanded options and extended service hours, the majority of our voters still prefer the most traditional method of all, and that is, of course, voting at their assigned polling place on Election Day. This slide provides data on 2 points. First, it offers a comparison of turnout between the 2016 presidential on the left and the 2018 gubernatorial on the right. Secondly, it shows that turnout is sorted by early voting for those years and Election Day voting. In the first instance, I wanted to highlight how significant last year's midterm election was in terms of participation. This slide demonstrates how truly on par with the presidential election it was for us in Minneapolis. The differences between election day turnout in 2016 and 2018 is less than 4,500 ballots, and that's a difference of about 3 percentage points between a presidential, our highest turnout, and a midterm. In the second instance, I also wanted to use these two charts to illustrate the impact of absentee balloting as it continues to grow in both years. It's roughly 25% of the total participation, as you can see, in both years. So very generally, 1 in every 4 ballots that are cast, or voters who participate, are doing so using early voting prior to Election Day. And I anticipate that that number will continue to increase in future years. It's also, I think, for us as election administrators and policymakers, a stark reminder that every day during that 46-day absentee balloting period is, for some voters, Election Day. And those voters deserve the same level of commitment, service, and equitable, fair access to the ballot. It drives home the point also that elections are expensive. It's true. But it's because elections are centered on the ballot box and ensuring equitable and fair access to everyone. Elections are the beginning point of representative democratic government, and that access is guaranteed by both federal and state constitutions. As the city's chief elections official, I count myself blessed to have the strong support of our mayor and our council. As a voter myself, I appreciate the leadership that you've provided us in helping pursue new and innovative ways to increase access to the ballot, to engage all communities, and to encourage participation. So on behalf of my team and on behalf of all Minneapolis voters, a thank you to you as our policymakers. And then in wrapping up quickly, each year I like to share some detail about our corps of election judges. These are the men and women who are on the front lines of democracy, as I like to say. They are the hearts and hands that make elections happen. And we simply could not serve the largest and the most votingest city in the top-ranked state without their commitment and their enthusiasm. This slide shows a self-reported breakdown by gender and age for those who served in the polls last year. As you can see, most of our judges identify as female between the ages of 55 and 69. The two largest groups by age alone are female between 16 and 19 and between 65 and 69. In part, the surge in our younger demographic reflects the positive impact of our nationally award-winning student election judge program. I'm required to say nationally award-winning student election judge program every time that I mention the student election judge program. This slide provides another analytical slice of data about our election judges, this time on race and ethnicity. As you can see, the majority of our election judges continue to be white, although we have made some good progress at diversifying our overall base. As stated every year during this report, it is our goal to ensure that our polling places reflect the communities that they serve, so that towards that end, we continue to pursue partnerships in the community to recruit and place more individuals from the city's myriad communities to work in our elections. And one place we've been highly successful at recruiting a more diverse, truly broad-based group is through our nationally award-winning student election judge program. This program is, for me, truly one of the highlights of my work in elections, and I am grateful to the leadership of our program coordinator, Karen Scheel, for her leadership to sustain, grow, and improve this program year after year. I think Karen's here. Karen is responsible for our program. So here is a true measure of the program's success. In 2018, we had so many student election judges express interest in participating in our program that we had to turn folks away. Why? Because state law limits the percentage of student judges that can work at the polls, and we placed 400 students in last year's midterm election. We placed 400 students in last year's election, all of whom received the same level of training and performed the same level of responsible duties as their adult contemporaries. We were able to place the students that we couldn't accept in our program in other cities around the area so that they could still participate in the election. This slide shows that we accepted 400 students from public, private, charter, and other schools. The largest percentage of these student judges come from the Minneapolis Public School District, which supported an active participation from their students, 244 for last year. These student judges have a significant positive impact on our election workforce. While they are gaining valuable job experience and building their resumes and earning good money at the same time, they bring to us more racial, ethnic diversity. They bring different lived experiences as millennials. They bring much needed secondary language skills for translation support and voter assistance. And they bring a sense of fun and enthusiasm. They really enjoy their work. In fact, the number of returning student judges has increased year after year, and we even have a number of former student alumni who now are returning to continue serving as election judges, now as the adult peers to the new generation of student judges. So very pleased with the program's success. And this slide then highlights the amount of training that Minneapolis requires of its election judges, which is far and beyond the minimal levels required by state law. I've never highlighted training in one of these reports before, and I wanted to spend some time sharing with you how much commitment we in Minneapolis provide to every single election judge that we put into the polls to serve voters. Under state law, all team judges must complete 2 hours of mandatory training every 2 years. Any supervisory judge, which would include our head and assistant head judges, must complete 1 additional hour of mandatory training, which means under state law, a team judge in most cities is going to have 2 hours of training, and the supervisory judge will have 3 hours of training, the basic training plus 1 additional hour of supervisory training. By contrast, in Minneapolis, all of our team judges are required to complete a 3-hour basic training course every 2 years. All of our head and assistant head supervisory judges must complete an additional 3-hour leadership training that focuses on the essentials of election law, the city's voter service standards, polling place management, tabulator equipment, coaching, and team development, in addition to the basic 3-hour course required of all judges. Judges who work as poll book and registration specialists are required to complete another 2 hours of training specific to the duties of registration and the use of our new electronic poll books. And finally, our precinct support judges, those who are our field marshals that are responsible for multiple precincts on election day, are required to complete the 3-hour basic training, the 3-hour leadership training, and an additional 1-hour training specific to their duties as the lead workers responsible for those precincts. That means that in Minneapolis, every team judge has completed 3 hours of training. Every poll book specialist has completed 5 hours of training. Every head and assistant head judge has completed 6 hours of training, and all of our precinct support judges have completed 7 hours of training, all to ensure the best service possible to our voters. Altogether, that means that our incredible training team plans for and provides almost 300 hours of training every year to our judges to make sure that we're providing the best service to voters. And that doesn't include the post-election debriefing sessions that we conduct every year with our seasonal staff and our election judges to get their feedback about how we, the city, can improve in future elections. So the commitment that the city invests in recruiting, selecting, training, supporting our election judges ensures that they're prepared to provide the best service to our voters and that our voters get the best service possible. Council is well aware of our voter outreach and education program. Each year we add new initiatives that seek to engage, inform, and enlist voters in the electoral process. The Elections and Voter Services website, which is pictured here, is the centerpiece of our communications efforts, along with our social media accounts on Facebook and Twitter. These are part of a larger plan developed every year in collaboration with the city's communications department. The city's communications department helps to spearhead efforts to secure a mix of paid, earned, and in-kind media coverage every year to publicize and promote elections. In 2018, the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department really stepped up to lead community outreach efforts for us. In addition to a series of regular electronic newsletters targeting neighborhoods and community-based organizations, they tabled at various events. They planned and conducted multiple in-person conversations with residents in all sorts of settings to promote awareness, to provide voter education and resources, and to drive engagement and participation. The photo here is some of our NCR partners in the community promoting the 2018 midterm election. And of course, our voter information guide, what has become another critical messaging device to ensure that all voters are election ready, that they are informed about the election and have the resources needed to participate. The production of the 2018 voter guide was the most cost-effective to date and included details about the upcoming 2020 census as well to reflect the tie between elections and the census and the need to participate in both. In 2018, the Elections and Voter Services Division, with help from our friends in the IT data analytics team, produced a number of data visualizations that were posted to our elections website and promoted through social media posts. These visualizations provided real-time updates on early vote participation and election day turnout. In total, these data maps generated more than 13,000 views, and they continue to be accessed today. As a result of the popularity of these data visualizations, our elections team, again in partnership with IT's data analytics team, is exploring the potential to create and host a voter dashboard, an online resource that could be easily customized to specific precincts in order to provide users with election-related dates, timelines, and turnout statistics. We're hopeful that these tools will continue to support the high level of civic literacy and community engagement that defines the city of Minneapolis. Much more information about our voter outreach and education initiatives in 2018, including these data visualizations, are provided in the report on pages 32 through 39. And then finally, a significant victory in 2018 is the fact that we were successful at conducting the record-setting midterm election within the budget allocated to us by the mayor and council. And while this might not seem like a bragging point, I want to give special thanks and recognition to our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Ruff, and his team who are with us. I didn't know they would be here. I'm glad he is. Mark, I want you to hear that I am very grateful for your help and your support this year and other years. For too many years, elections were under budgeted. Each year, our elections division received a set $500,000 to conduct the election, whether that was a presidential, a gubernatorial, or a municipal. That amount doesn't even cover our election judge payroll, not to mention supplies, equipment, polling place rental costs, ballot production, testing, legal notices that have to be made every year, let alone multiple initiatives to expand ballot access through early vote centers, voter guides, increased staffing, and similar things. So we were, to put it bluntly, operating at a deficit from the start each year. When Mr. Ruff joined the city as CFO, he immediately corrected this. He worked with our elections director and me to right-size the division's budget. And going forward, he went to bat with us, or for us, with policymakers to ensure that we have the funding needed to serve our voters to the level they've come to expect. Mr. Ruff has been a true advocate for elections in Minneapolis, and this victory is more his accomplishment equal to the victory it is for Grace Walker-Lewis, our director, and me, and the entire elections division. We are deep in his gratitude. So, in fact, with significant support from Mr. Ruff and the finance team, we were able to conduct this record-setting election with more than $400,000 to spare. And that's certainly something I think we can all celebrate. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair, and before I stand for questions, with the committee's indulgence, I'd like to recognize the incredible elections team led by Director Grace Walker-Lewis. Our professional administrators include Tim Schwartz, Jeff Narrowbrook, Eric Jeffries Burns, and I'm also including our incredible team members Kate Redden and John Martin. And of course, all of our sister city departments and the thousands of men and women who comprise our election judge corps and seasonal staff. And again, to the mayor and council for your leadership, your support, and your encouragement for all the things that we've done reflected in this report before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carl, and thank you, team. Real quick, I wanted to make sure that the public know that we've been joined by Councilmembers Kano, Warasame, and Jenkins. Before we go to receive and file, I wanted to see if any of my colleagues had any questions about the 2018 election. I see Councilmember Kano.
Thank you, Councilmember Ellison. I appreciate it. Casey, this is an impressive presentation, and I really have a lot of respect for the work that you and Grace lead to make sure that the elections division is leading the nation on this front. I do naturally have some concerns about the voting patterns that we're seeing, where the areas that seem to have the most resources are the areas that are producing the highest amount of voter turnout numbers. And if you look at that map that you presented that showed the highest areas of participation, and you overlapped the areas of concentrated poverty with 50% people of color or more in the city, the maps would align perfectly. So my question perhaps relates to more about what's coming next with the presentation around what we're going to do to help change that. I mean, it's my hope that the city can do something to help change those numbers. I'm a little, I guess, like, embarrassed, that my ward is one of the wards that has a low voter turnout, except for places like Powderhorn, which is great. There's always good turnout there. But places like Little Earth, East Phillips, Midtown Phillips, Central, those are neighborhoods that I would consider high in culture and low on voter participation. So I really want to help kind of crack that nut, and I would love to hear your thoughts about what we're anticipating for the next 9 to 12 months on how we can help to break that, what I would perceive as a pattern. I'm sure this isn't the first time these numbers have presented in this way. So I'm either happy to hear your thoughts now or in the following discussion about what we're hoping to do in 2020.
Mr. Chair, to Councilmember Kano, as you know, we've worked very diligently over the past several election cycles to directly target greater engagement participation in several of these communities that historically are underrepresented and are not turning out at the same levels. We've had some success. I don't want that map to portray that we haven't. For example, at Little Earth, we've partnered there to create the Make Voting a Tradition program, which is generating excitement and enthusiasm around voting. But I think there are patterns that reflect in this voting turnout map that would reflect in other maps, as you have pointed out, that deal with larger issues than just voting. They deal with the perception of government, trust in government, how government appears and presents itself to these communities and how we present ourselves to them. And so one of the things we've deliberately done since 2016 is try to find those trusted embedded agents or ambassadors within community who can take our message into the community. So it's us providing resources, providing information, helping to tear down some of those sort of barriers between a government agency, Elections and Voter Services, as much as I might love it, is still part of government. And that means that we carry the weight of what goes with that title. And so having those trusted agents embedded is a long-term solution. It's not a short game we're playing to build trust in community. It's a long game. And so we've started that process of seeding those relationships and building trust and making connections. I think one of the areas where we've been able to do that is through our seasonal staffing opportunities and with our election judge corps. Still not where I'd like to see it, but improvements over, say, 9 years ago. And by building those long-term relationships, those ambassadors then go back into those communities and say, no, this is something you can trust. This is something you can believe in. This is something that you should pay attention to and something in which you should engage. So those are hopeful messages, and I do have some further continuing thoughts along that line in the next presentation, geared up for the 2020 presidential. But I should also note, too, the active participation of members of this council, the most diverse council we've had. I know I can speak for Grace when I say we have regular contracts from many of you who have ideas and thoughts and have connections and represent these communities about what we can do to engage. And we're eager to partner and expand our work with you and with others in the community.
I did want to just respond back a few thoughts. So I appreciate you reminding me about the Making Voting a Tradition effort, and there's probably similar multi-ethnic efforts that are community-based that the city can lean on and support and highlight. And so as I'm thinking about this, I am sending you both an email shortly about connecting with NCR's multilingual, multi-ethnic media and communications outreach efforts, where they already have functioning Spanish language radio programs and Somali radio programs, where we can start building in some education and awareness. Additionally, I'm curious if there's any sort of alignment that we can have between NCR, NRP funding related efforts to partner with groups who already have those trusted sources, those trusted ambassadors who are already doing work on driver's licenses or municipal ID or other efforts that we can just, again, kind of couple this work with. So I'm just going to send you a few ideas online, but then also wondered, do we have any data that talks about why folks aren't showing up in greater numbers? Like, do we have a sense of what that might be about? I mean, I can kind of guess and talk to folks in my ward, but I'm just curious if we have any more pointed data.
Through the chair, Councilmember O'Connell, we don't have data per se on elections in general. Where we have been fortunate as a city is we do conduct a post-election survey that is statistically valid of voters, non-voters, campaigns, candidates, and election workers following every municipal election. Because of our use of ranked choice voting, it was seen as important to get a sense of how that's impacting campaigns, turnout, participation. So it's not a direct corollary from a municipal election only to a gubernatorial or a presidential election, but the feedback we've had when we survey voters, which is something we would love to do more of and more consistently and not just limit to municipal elections, the data shows that people who aren't turning out aren't interested. That's a very broad statement. And so how do you tackle that? How do you crack that nut, to use your parlance? I think that one of the reasons is, again, this is a long game. It's education about, you may not think the election matters, but it does, and here's why. Here's how it directly relates to your life. Those aren't easy sound bites per se, and so it takes a while to develop the trusted relationship with these organizations to begin to do that. There is national data, and Jeff Narrowbrook, who joined our office from the Secretary of State, can speak with you more on this, but nonprofit organizations are having a great success across the nation in terms of connecting with communities, especially the more at-risk, underrepresented, vulnerable populations, and providing an entryway into elections. And so there has been some national data that would show that partnerships with nonprofits as trusted agents in communities is a successful path to gaining entry into those communities, something that is in our 2020 report that I can explore further.
Thank you. So we've got questions from Councilmember Palmisano, Jenkins, Gordon, and Cunningham. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carl, this is great. More people voting is good. It also shows our power statewide, I think, and it's one of the biggest things. This team is one of the biggest things that we can do as a city to improve our larger political landscape, especially in the favor of our city. I had a couple quick questions. The first is something that you mentioned, and I think that you said in your presentation that direct balloting is cheaper for us than absentee centers, or do you just mean that direct balloting centers that last to be open 7 days with the staffing and the site rental is less expensive than a longer term?
Mr. Chair, to Councilmember Palmisano's question, yes, the latter of those. Operating an early vote center only during the 7-day period of direct balloting is cheaper than operating a vote center for the entire 46 days of absentee balloting.
I see. Can you comment or speculate on how population increases are factored into maps like this on turnout? Because, for example, in Ward 3, where we've seen huge population growth over the past 4 years, how do we find? Can you just comment on that? How are we equating that into maps like this?
Mr. Chair, to the council member's question, this map is only showing turnout and participation. It does not reflect changes or growth or decreases, even for that matter, in those precincts. So changes in population are not reflected here. This is simply showing of our registered voters, those who showed up and voted.
And those registered voters are estimated on the last census data, or they're on the last voter file in terms of where people live?
So it's a changing number in Minnesota. It's difficult because of same-day registration. We never have a firm target. So this is based on the total turnout of voters who cast ballots on Election Day in November of last year. It doesn't account for population. It doesn't account for voters who were not registered and didn't vote. It simply accounts for those who showed up and cast a ballot. The CVAP is a national method of tracking, and that stands for Citizens Voting Age Population, CVAP. It's based on some theories by a professor in Florida used by all states that say you shouldn't limit this focus to those who actually turned up and committed ballots. You should look more broadly at people who were eligible but didn't. So this gets to the previous comments from Councilmember Cano about how are we looking at people who could have voted but didn't, and what were the reasons why. And so the CVAP is an important tool that states use, but the data they use is not down at the precinct level where we would want it. It's at a higher level. And so for us, we measure turnout in both ways. That top number on this particular side that says 76%, that's of the registered voters we had following Election Day. The turnout estimated by voting age citizens, which was a potential eligible pool, moves it down to 68%, based again on those estimates that are contained in the CVAP.
One more question, if I may. Well, we'd like to certainly have pride in our high concentrations around Southwest Minneapolis. I know that I do. It does feel to me like, as I've seen your reports over the years, that turnout is starting to balance out more across the city. So in a little different way than Councilmember Cano just mentioned, I do see increases in these populations, and I'm curious if you could speculate a little bit more as to the work of your team that contributes to that, and whether or not the direct balloting, the early voting helps from your impressions, because I know there's not a lot of specific data on it.
Through the chair, thank you for that opportunity. Yes, it's a complex question, and my answers, while attempting to be nuanced, maybe aren't getting to the point. I do think we're seeing more turnout, more engagement in these communities that have historically been underrepresented. The difficulty is its level of turnout and participation as populations change, as the city has grown, as those demographics have shifted and evolved. It's maybe not reflected here at how much more. If we were to go back to, say, 1990, 2000, now 2018, I think you would see that there are greater levels of engagement and higher levels of participation in voting. It's just not tracking as quickly. It's not moving as fast. And again, that's why I said this is a long game we're in to break down some cultural barriers, long held beliefs about government engagement and partnership and what that looks like and how effective it can be. So yes, I think we have had, and I would speculate we've had more engagement, more participation, and the Make Voting a Tradition partnership we've had with the Little Earth Tribe is a good example where previously there wasn't engagement, there wasn't contact with our office, there wasn't partnership. There is now. And to say that we're a partner, let me be very clear on what that means. That means we provide them information and they do all the work. They are very ecstatic about their program. They are very effective. They are leading their community and engaging in their access to the ballot box. We're merely facilitating that access. I don't want to take credit for that. I don't want it to be sounding like we're taking credit for that. We helped, but we're not leading that work.
Thank you. I think that's really groundbreaking stuff.
Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, and thank you, Mr. Carl, for that great presentation. I just want to acknowledge the work of your team and crew at a time when voter suppression is one of the major issues in our country. We are seeing more increased voter turnout, more engagement in the political process, and electoral process. You know, I think it's really a big responsibility of those seeking public office to help get voter turnout up to the levels that we want to see, which is 100% of eligible voters to be out and engaged in our electoral process. So I just want to congratulate your team and your staff on continuously increasing voter turnout in the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you on behalf of that team who are here. I appreciate those words, especially that they're here to hear that. I often don't pass those things along to them as much as I should, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
I also really appreciate the report and all the outstanding work that's been done, and it's great to see that our turnout was so good. One of the things I appreciate is the graphs and the charts and all the tracking that we do, and it's presented in such a good way. When we were talking about the citywide turnouts and the difference in precincts, it made me wonder about what are the trends and what are the changes. I know it's not something in this report. We're focused on 2018, but it would be interesting to see if some of those white precincts have turned green. And I think we should admit to ourselves we'd like to see that map come back all over 80%, all dark green someday, we can maybe get there. And measuring those trends might also help us understand especially if we notice what year we tried what idea and how, if it had any impact, what actually works and maybe doesn't work. And I know that we are constantly learning as we go and evaluating, but seeing those trends, it might help at some future point to look. Maybe we are making progress, but if we aren't, and if we're going backwards in some areas, we should know about that and do something about it for sure. I also just wanted to note that I appreciated that there was an East Early Vote Center on the University campus. I know it was had the lowest use compared to them, but it was still over 2,000 people. I think that was significant. And I don't know how we craft and think about where to put those. It actually looked like we were putting them in some pretty significantly low turnout areas of the city, because the university with all the students, there's pretty low turnout right where that was, and it was, I think, right on campus at the field house. So, and I think in North Minneapolis. And that South Minneapolis one that was so popular, that was that on Lake Street or really close? So, and that's the other thing is, why was that so popular? Why were people going there? Is it transit? Was it the location, some kind of outreach that happened? So hopefully we'll keep doing that, and you can respond to any of these comments or not.
Mr. Chair, there's 2 points I would want to respond to. First from mine, and second because my staff were hounding me on this yesterday. And so the first is, in terms of historical data, to Councilmember Cano's point, to Councilmember Polisano's point, to your point, too, I think the the question all of us would have is, how have we made a difference, and what are we doing, what's been successful, and how those metrics maybe changed across time. The person who led our data visualizations from our team working with IT was Aaron Grossman, who's here in the room. And so I think we could certainly ask him or task him with we'll be before you many times before the 2020 presidential with updates and plans and reports. And I think maybe one of those could include a historical analysis of turnout, recognizing precincts and wards have changed over time, but that to do sort of that comparison about how the turnout data have changed would be something I think of worth and of value to us as we plan not only next year's election but future elections. And on the second point, to the early vote centers and the siting, yes, we have criteria we try and use: close access to public transportation, large areas where people can get to well-recognized community-based locations as well. But with the university in particular, we were very committed last year to putting an early vote center on the campus. We did the best we could. We worked with the university administration. The feedback we've had from students there was that it wasn't the best location for them, and that they believe the students who would have had the most access and therefore the most benefit have suggested we find a different site. On campus, near campus, but they are very, very eager to have a center back next year, and the elections team is very committed to that as well. So I think that our goal there is to find ways of connecting, and I think, Councilmember, with your connections at the university, you could help us to find a more advantageous location at or near the campus. So we would welcome the ability to partner with you on finding a site that would better serve students.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think Councilmember Fletcher and I can team up, and we can come up with something. And if the students are saying Kaufman Union's best, or it would be great to hear what they're saying, or the student association, and try to work with them and put pressure on the university to give us a little bit of space to do that. The last thing I just wanted to note is, with some elections, the elections department can do all the work that they want, but if nobody's campaigning and if it's a boring election and nobody cares, they don't show up. So there are independent or there are external variables
Yep.
that we can't necessarily, as an elections department, control, and which also means some of the credit for the voter turnout might go to some of the campaigns or work that's going on outside, or the races or the climate and all of that stuff. So keep that in mind as we look at trends, and they're going up and down, and as we're taking great credit for all our successes, that, you know, there's other variables that are contributing to that. But let's mostly think of those other variables when we have disappointments and not blame ourselves.
You are absolutely correct, Councilmember. Research consistently demonstrates that what drives the highest level of turnout is competitive races, controversial ballot questions, things that really motivate people to get out. What we do adds to, hopefully enhances and supports that, but it is driven by what's on the ballot. That's what drives turnout.
Oh, well, we can help with that, including those controversial ballot questions. I'll get on that.
President, questions?
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Carl, for all of this detail. Much appreciated. I have a few questions, but I first just wanted to speak to Councilmember Gordon's point. In Ward 4, there's a couple of pieces. First, the two highest voting precincts are actually where racial covenants were. So I think that correlation is worth noting. Also, we in our, Councilmember Ellison and I, in our 2017 election, increased voter turnout in our wards, but it was like pulling teeth. It was incredibly challenging to be in the most votingest city, in the most votingest state, like pulling teeth to get folks. I live in McKinley, which is one of the lowest turnouts, and that was a really big challenge. And so, and also wanting to name that our lowest numbers are still higher than the national turnout.
Yes.
So I think that's also very much so worth noting, that we have work to do in order for there to be proportionality in terms of voting throughout the city, but it's still incredible that we are still above the national average. So just wanted to name that as well. So I'll save some of my questions for after hearing what the plan is for 2020, but I do want to speak to the national award-winning student elections program. First, I want to name that they are Gen Z. I'm a millennial, I'm in my 30s, so they're Gen Z. And also, I am curious, is there a breakdown of participation by zip codes?
I don't have that, but I'd be happy to have our staff look into that and get it for you.
That would be really appreciated. And I would imagine that the school location, the environment around it greatly impacts it, because I remember seeing somewhere in here that only like 50% of the students who participated from Southwest actually lived in Ward 13, and I know some kids from North go down there, so I'm just curious to see like what impact even the location of the school, because we see South and Southwest is the highest represented. Really proud to see Patrick Henry there, and really want to extend my partnership in that. I have a close relationship with folks over at Patrick Henry, would love to have a large representation. Patrick Henry actually falls within 4-6, which is also a lower turnout rate, and so one of the lowest ones. And so I would be more than happy. I feel like where we really make a change is that intergenerational partnership and relationships where kids are a part of it, and then they inspire their parents to actually like, oh no, you have to go do this now, because they know. And so I want to extend myself as a partner to be able to build, and I'm down to set a goal for the amount of kids we want to get there from, represented from the 4th Ward or whatever the case may be. That is something that I very much so want to bring to the table, and just put that out there for you all. And the one thing I will say, and you might be addressing this in the next portion of the presentation, but I want to point that 4-3, so McKinley, 5-2 Jordan, and 5-8 Hawthorne all line with Lowry Avenue. And so I think that it's worthwhile for us to consider a location there on Lowry, so that we actually have it right smack dab in the middle of the lowest turnouts in the entire city. So just wanted to put that observation that and we're happy to help find locations or partners or whatever the case may be in order to find a good location there. Last question that I have is, are there goals that are set for voter turnout by the department? Like, is there, like, we want to reach 60% or whatever the case may be? Like, is there any sort of benchmarks? I know there's a lot of external factors, but I'm just curious about in-house.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, internally we have our own goals, and I won't share those only because I think those who want to prognosticate with the crystal ball have to be prepared to eat glass, and I don't want to do that. Also, as Councilmember Gordon was alluding to, we can't really control turnout, and I don't want to put a metric up and then fall short of that goal when there's so many external factors. But every year we do set goals, and when we come to you and tell you what we're projecting the turnout is and what we're basing our election on, you can better bet that part of that is a reflection of what we want to achieve.
Great. I feel very passionate about increasing voter turnout for the 2020 election in Ward 4. I feel that when we look at building power, one of the most impactful ways for us to do that is through voting. That's an entryway into civic participation. And you mentioned civic literacy, and that's also something I feel very passionate about, is increasing the literacy, civic literacy of folks, so that they understand that that's just really the beginning part of representative democracy. Like, y'all got to stay on me and stay engaged with me so that we can actually get some work done. And so I, again, would like to make myself available as a partner to be able to increase voter turnout. If we want to set a internal goal of how we want to do it, my office, and we can engage folks and get some energy moving. I really want to see Ward 4 be on par with the rest of the city, and as the council member for that area, I am making myself available to be able to make that happen in a nonpartisan but partner way. So
We share the goal and look forward to working with you.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Carroll, just have a clarifying question. We had some talk about the cost of the election and about early voting centers. I just wanted to clarify that a true early voting, as opposed to what we have here in Minnesota with no excuse absentee, I believe that's cheaper than no excuse absentee that we have here.
Through the chair, Councilmember Schrader, it's a little more complex than a straight yes or no, but in general, what we have as absentee voting is more expensive because it has what we call the 3 Ps: people, postage, and paper. And so when I have to give you a paper ballot and you fill that out and we put it inside a secrecy envelope and then inside of a marked envelope, there's 2 envelopes, a ballot, people have to handle that, and then there's postage associated with that when it's vote by mail. So those 3 Ps, postage, people, and paper, drive up the cost of absentee balloting, which isn't involved to the same extent in true early voting, where you come into a vote center, you put your completed ballot into a tabulator just on election day, and you walk away. And the tabulator tells you there's a mistake, there's not a mistake, your ballot was cast. So you have that additional securities, and you have that convenience of knowing my ballot was cast, there were no mistakes, and I'm done. And you walk away from early voting. With absentee balloting, it's the 3 Ps, plus it's the I hope they got it. If you send it back in the mail, did it get there in time? So it is a little bit better, in my opinion, I'm speaking as my opinion, to do true early voting than absentee balloting. But again, in Minnesota, under the rubric of absentee balloting, we have direct balloting, which is most similar to early voting, and we have a multitude of other varieties as well. So we still provide maximum opportunity.
Well, in light of that, I just kind of want to thank you and your department for, making sure that in light of whatever Minnesota decides to do, that we make sure that the residents of Minneapolis have the easiest, most secure way to vote.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carlin. Thanks to my colleagues. It looks like there are no further questions, and so before we move on to the report of the 2020 coming election, I will move to receive and file. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, the ayes have it, and the report will be filed. Our second item is the initial report about plans and preparation for the 2020 presidential election. Mr. Carl.
Mr. Chair, elections are all about numbers. Boy, we just proved that. Here are some more numbers. In just 586 days, Americans will cast their ballots in the 2020 presidential election on Tuesday, November 3rd. And in only 342 days, Minneapolis voters will have the opportunity to have their say in who should be the next president of the United States as part of our presidential nominating primary set for March 3rd, also known as Super Tuesday. Between now and then, the Elections and Voter Services Division will be relocating to its new headquarters at 980 East Hennepin Avenue. We'll also be recruiting to fill our 2 vacant full-time administrator positions to complete our permanent team so that they can help us plan and conduct the 2020 election. And we'll be looking to recruit, train, and deploy between 1,800 and 2,000 or more election judges to serve our more than 200,000 voters in 132 precincts during 3 separate election events next year, all of which is overlapping one other high priority, high visibility, highly important event, the 2020 census, set for Monday, April 1st. And at that time, we want to ensure that the more than 422,000 residents of Minneapolis are all counted. So based on all of those numbers and in analyzing data and trends from the past several election cycles, we expect a full year and the potential for another record-setting voter engagement and participation. This report then provides some high-level initial plans about our preparations for the 2020 presidential election cycle. Here again are some more numbers, this time in the form of key dates. As already noted, the presidential nominating primary is set for Tuesday, March 3rd. Prior to that, the early voting period for the nominating primary will begin on January 17, and it will run through March 2. The pre-registration period for that primary will close on February 11th. As noted, Census Day is Monday, April 1st. Based on timelines from prior years, we could expect to get final census data returned to Minneapolis in February or March of 2021. And after that, the fun begins with redistricting in earnest, leading up to the next city election on Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021. But jumping back to 2020, the regular primary for all other races other than president will be conducted Tuesday, August 11th, the absentee balloting period beginning on July 22nd and continuing through August 10th, and then the big show set for Tuesday, November 3rd, with the 46-day absentee balloting period starting September 18th and running through Monday, November 2nd. Pre-registration for the general election closes October 13th. So as you can tell, it'll be a very incredibly busy year. We have a lot to do in that time frame, and today's report, as I mentioned, highlights some of our initial plans. Again, we will be in front of you multiple times as we continue to refine and edit those preparations. This is the high-level start. So as noted during the report on the 2018 gubernatorial election, Minneapolis has been leading efforts for many years to expand ballot access and increase voter choice and convenience. Building on those prior successes, our plans for the next year's presidential election cycle largely fall into 3 big buckets. First, we have plans around voter registration and get out the vote initiatives. Second, we have plans about improving access for all voters, especially among those communities that have been historically underrepresented. And third, we have plans that center around employment opportunities as a means of diversifying our team of election judges, as well as helping to support enterprise goals about job training and skills development. These are the key elements of our initial plans that we'll be discussing this morning. So we begin with plans on voter registration and get out the vote initiatives. In this bucket of ideas, we're focusing on leveraging our existing community partnerships as well as building new organizational and personal contacts to build awareness about the election, the importance of voting, and the many different ways that a voter can participate. This includes re-examining the existing core program, developing specific campaigns about election registration, and producing a voter information guide to be delivered to every residential address in the city. In terms of community outreach, we again expect to collaborate with our sister city departments, especially the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department. As I mentioned, last year, NCR led multiple outreach initiatives that helped to spur early vote turnout and increase participation. This included tabling at a variety of community events, facilitating one-on-one and small group discussions, supporting registration drives, and a host of other efforts. Through their established networks with neighborhoods and diverse cultural communities, NCR will be able to help us engage with target populations that have historically been underrepresented. This includes, as an example, but is not limited to, African American, American Indian, East African, Latinx, and Southeast Asian communities. NCR will also help us to connect with, importantly, first-time voters, whether they're just turning 18 and entering the franchise or are new citizens eager to exercise their constitutional rights. Military service members and their families, as well as the veterans who have already served their nation, homeless members of our community, and those who are living in shelters or who may be in transition, voters with disabilities, seniors, and in a city with a population composed of more than 50% renters, tenants, which is supported by our city's Tenant Notice of Voter Registration program. An important aspect of outreach centers on personal contact with voters. As I was mentioning in response to Councilmember Cano's question earlier, research shows that people join causes, they contribute to purposes, and they volunteer at higher rates when they're asked. That's that trusted ambassador model. So there's power in inviting participation, and we intend to invite voters to engage. We intend to invite them to show up, and we need to invite them to participate. So we plan to extend that invitation both directly and indirectly through our partnerships with community-based groups in our one-on-one encounters and planned events that have small groups, neighborhoods, and networks that we want to build out and expand, and we welcome all of you as part of that effort, obviously. We also want to explore ways of revamping our core program in 2020 to support multiple efforts. The core program was created in 2015 as a means of partnering with nonprofit community service organizations to recruit election volunteers. So under the core program, nonprofits who recruit up to 10 volunteers who agree to serve as election judges can earn $1,300 with an additional $130 for every additional volunteer judge recruited. Although the core program offers opportunities for mutually beneficial outcomes between elections division and our nonprofit partners, we in the elections office haven't put the resources into that program to really develop it. Therefore, we will be recruiting a full-time program coordinator in 2020 to leverage this program. We also want to explore using this same program and the nonprofit partnerships on which it is based to further amplify our voter outreach and education efforts, similar to a very popular and successful grant program administered by King County, Washington, that engages nonprofits in its voter outreach, engagement, education, and similar efforts. So we're hoping to leverage the core program to connect these nonprofits into the work of not only recruiting election judges, but also in terms of promoting voter engagement, voter education, and participation, maybe even serving as a satellite vote center during that 7-day direct balloting period throughout the city. In terms of driving pre-registration numbers in advance of each of these 3 separate elections next year, we want to explore the concept of ensuring that every front desk is the right desk to access information about voter registration. Particularly when it comes to city government departments, we want to ensure that registration information and application forms are readily and easily available, visible, and in all of our front desk personnel are then trained in the basics of voter registration in Minnesota. While we absolutely want to commit to that level of access in the city, we also want to explore partnerships with other community partners to ensure the broadest coverage possible. So libraries, community centers, neighborhood organizations, nonprofit service agencies, even our ambassadors from the Downtown Improvement District. Wherever a potential voter is and could have an interaction, we want to make sure we have the information available. And of course, each year we have special events to promote engagement on National Voter Registration Day. Next year, that will be September 22nd. In prior years, the city's elections division, in partnership with NCR and our friends from Hennepin County's elections team, have staged a variety of on-the-street outreach events in order to promote awareness, to register voters, and to ensure that voters are election ready. Count on us doing similar types of outreach events next year for National Voter Registration Day. But beyond this one day, we also hope to lead and support registration drives throughout the year. To do this, the elections team is going to be creating some ready-made kits that will include all the information and resources needed to register voters. These kits then be customized or tailored by other groups as part of their Get Out the Vote plans and campaigns. We're also exploring the potential of conducting a basic how-to primer on planning and conducting voter registration drives that could offer groups and nonprofits and others nonpartisan, factual instructions and resources on how to plan and conduct a registration drive. Again, leveraging our partnership with NCR, we foresee taking this kind of training and those registration kits out into the community, especially in our underserved and underrepresented groups, to help educate, engage, and encourage broad participation. So you can see that we're putting a significant focus on registration, and that's because research shows that mandatory registration remains one of the most significant barriers to universal participation by otherwise qualified eligible citizens. Even in Minneapolis, the city that just had the most turnout in a midterm election year, we know that registration presents a disproportionate and negative impact on certain voters. And specifically, that includes those who are younger or maybe first-time voters, those who don't own property or homes or who also move frequently, those who are from lower educational attainment or lower socioeconomic status, and those from communities of color. A little bit ago, I noted that elections are inclusive and are guaranteed by both federal and state constitutions, but being registered is the golden key to participation. That's why we're so strongly focused on pursuing any and all efforts that promote voter registration as the first step so that we can achieve the greatest level of participation possible. We again plan to produce a voter information guide mailed to every resident in Minneapolis. These guides include information about the 3 ways to cast a ballot, a summary of all ballot content, including how to access a sample ballot, instructions on how to register or verify your registration or how to register on Election Day, information about precincts, polling places, and their operating hours, voter assistance and resources that are available, a copy of the Minnesota Voters' Bill of Rights, and contact information for the city's Elections and Voter Services Division. Our second group of proposals pertains to improving ballot access, and this includes promoting multiple satellite voting centers, extending in-person service hours, and considering additional precincts to meet the needs of a growing community. So, the Elections Division will be pushing early voting options in all of our outreach and education initiatives to leverage networks to build awareness about these pre-election day options that are available to all voters. Especially important for us is pushing the options for pre-election day voting through absentee balloting in those precincts that have a higher turnout or which in the area around the University of Minnesota experience higher than normal levels of same-day registration, which can build long lines and add to wait times. So we want to make sure that in the high turnout areas and in areas where same-day registration is very high, they know about in advance the opportunity for early voting. By promoting vote by mail, early in person, and other forms of absentee balloting, we hope to achieve all those goals. And in terms of increasing access, Minneapolis has done excellent work through its early vote centers, moving ballot access out into the community. This incredible success of the 2018 program, where our satellite centers were opened for those 7 days during direct balloting, demonstrates that we should consider expanding that model for the anticipated high turnout in 2020. This slide then shows the location of City Hall and our new Elections and Voter Services headquarters. Those are depicted by the blue and red stars on this map. In 2016 and again in 2018, Minneapolis operated a permanent early vote center at its downtown site. It opened 3 additional locations to take the ballot into the community. In both years, a satellite site was located at the Urban League to serve voters in North Minneapolis. And then again, as you know, sites were opened in the northeast/east side and on the south side, though in different locations in 2016 and 2018. For 2020, the Elections Division recommends exploring options for additional satellite sites as shown as the zone areas on this map. And again, these sites would only be open during the 7-day ballot period, direct balloting period, so there would be savings in terms of the costs compared to 2016 when all of our satellite sites were open for the entire 46-day period. Given the anticipated relocation of the elections headquarters away from downtown, we also think thought should be given to adding another early vote center that would be open all 46 days to help balance out the access across the entire community and its population in advance of Election Day. Since 2014, Minneapolis has offered extended in-person service hours, more so than any other city in the state. This has included extended service hours each weekday during the final 2 weeks of absentee balloting, as well as weekend hours on Saturdays and Sundays during the last 2 weeks before Election Day. These extended hours are only done in conjunction with the general election, and we support doing that again in 2020. Here's one of my favorite charts to share each year. It shows that even as the city's population continues to increase, now surpassing 422,000 residents, the number of precincts to serve that growing population has been cut. In 1990, when the city's population was less than 370,000, there were 172 precincts. Today, with the population approaching 425,000, Minneapolis has 132 precincts. So this impacts voter service. This widening gap between population and precincts, if unaddressed, can be expected to result in long lines, extended wait times at the polls, delays in accessing the ballot, and frustrated voters. It's especially true in a high turnout election like a presidential. According to guidelines promulgated by the Secretary of State, a precinct should not have more than 2,500 registered voters. And yet, of its 132 precincts, Minneapolis had 23 sites which exceeded these state recommended limits last year. That's 17% of the total number of precincts that are simply too large. In fact, in last year's elections, of our 132 precincts, 19 served pre-registered populations between 2,500 and 3,000. The limit's 2,500. We had 19 that were beyond that, and 2 which had registered populations exceeding 3,000 pre-registered voters. Under a recent change in state election law, cities must now adopt their precinct plans for elections in the next succeeding year. So by December of this year, we have to adopt our plan for precincts and polling places that will serve the presidential primary, the August primary, and the November general election next year. In order to do that, we should be considering, and we'll be back in front of the council to talk about if 132 precincts is the correct number, or if we need to increase that number, and if so, where. And then finally, as with every year, we will be pursuing strategies through recruitment to diversify our core of election judges and our seasonal staff, making contact with multiple communities throughout the city, although it is seasonal. Employment with the Elections Division provides on-the-job skills in customer service, basic computer applications, exposure to detailed legal processes, project management, and a very busy office environment that's driven by very tight and inflexible deadlines. We've been fortunate over the past many years to leverage both the city's Urban Scholars Program and our own seasonal employment opportunities to promote individuals into full-time employment here at the city, or to make positive referrals for full-time jobs in partner agencies and organizations. So these jobs can lead to and have resulted in other job opportunities for many individuals that work with us. Given that we have the presidential nominating primary at the beginning of the year, the Elections Division anticipates opening recruitment for its seasonal workforce in October this year. We anticipate recruitment for election judges will begin in November of this year. We will need to be fully staffed and ready to serve voters when absentee balloting for the presidential primary begins on January 17th. We anticipate a second wave of seasonal hiring will open in early May next year as we prepare for the August primary, and then a third wave of seasonal employment will be opening in late July for the November general election. All of these employment opportunities will be announced through our elections website and also cross-promoted from our social media accounts and from the city's human resources job recruitment page. And of course, we will advise all policymakers in advance so that you can help us, as you always do, publicize these employment opportunities as well. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation on our very initial plans about 2020. I'm happy to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carl. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Carl. I have two questions, the first is more of a point. So for the CORE program, there actually are no service organizations in Ward 4, and so the only nonprofits we have are neighborhood associations. So just to kind of put that on folks' radars that we don't really have service organizations, so there really isn't the opportunity to partner, but we do have active neighborhood associations, so I'm happy to help facilitate and partner in that way. And I'm curious about homeless residents and how they are able to vote. At YouthLink, by their last measures, over 50% of the young folks that are there are from the zip codes 55412 and 55411. And so I was hoping that I could get some clarification on how do homeless residents, how are they able to vote, and any thoughts on like how we can engage them?
Through the chair, Councilmember Cunningham, I'm going to ask our director, Grace Walker-Rose, to answer this question. She's much more knowledgeable than I will. Before she does, I want to point out, though, that in last year's election, this team was the one that came forward and said, there's a homeless encampment in Minneapolis and there's an election happening, and we need to engage with them. And so I want to give them props for that effort and then have Ms. Walker-Rose explain the details.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, right now we are in the process of in a work group with Hennepin County, Ramsey County, Dakota County, service providers, and election officials to address that problem or that challenge and opportunity. We are working together. We're in the process of figuring out how to promote that opportunity through the service providers, and we actually have homeless members on our working force, and we are developing those strategies as we speak right now. So by the end of this year, we will have a comprehensive strategy on how to engage homeless not only in the city of Minneapolis, but throughout the metro area.
Can you explain like the process? So if, let's say, you know, I go to YouthLink and I'm like, hey, we should get out and vote, how are they able to do that? Because maybe they don't have like a proof of residence or whatever the case may be.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, I apologize for not answering the second question. Right now, they have the opportunity of vouching, which means any individual that is registered in that area and can attest that that individual actually lives there, they can register on election day. In fact, that is the strategy we used for the Hiawatha encampment. We engaged other registered voters to assist us. And it was quite emotional to see individuals who have never voted in their life, from elderly to the young, come in on that process. So we're in the process through this work group to determine best strategies to keep that dignity and courtesy and respect of how to engage others to assist them in the vouching process. It may come down to some consideration as far as some policy changes at the state level to engage and assist in those populations.
Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for that. Last technical question on it. So our homeless residents, I guess I'm just curious as to when they're vouched for, if they're from North Minneapolis, but they're sleeping on the streets downtown, where would they be vouched for?
Residency is determined by where they sleep. So if they sleep, on a corner, under a bridge, in a vehicle in front of someone's house, they engage those individuals in that precinct to attest that, yes, that's where they sleep every night, therefore they are eligible to vote in that particular precinct.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for this presentation and for all the work. Since I didn't speak earlier, I'll just echo my colleagues' congratulations on 2018's job well done. It's so important. And when you look at the voting rates in cities in the South, thinking about how different our national political landscape would be if other cities could emulate the success that we're seeing here. So thank you for that work. The elections team engaged my office last week to talk about some of the specific precincts in Ward 3, and we had a really interesting debate that I wanted to kind of hear your take on about a sort of question about does it inherently disadvantage voters to be in a precinct that has more than 2,500 registered voters if we have a really great polling place that has the capacity, and can we just staff up and add resources to a precinct to make sure that there aren't long wait times. 3-1 in Dinkytown is sort of the obvious one in my ward, where I went last year and stood in line with the last voter in line to make sure nobody left, and it was a lot of fun, but it also did take a long time. So the question of do we add resources to that precinct or do we need to split it? Is there something inherently advantageous to voters about being in a smaller precinct versus just having a precinct with a lot of great resources to make sure that the line keeps moving? So I'm sort of curious how you're approaching that question.
Through the chair, Councilmember Fletcher, I think those are based on data, but also based on what I would suggest is largely voter preference. Do you want to stand in a long line? Will you consider yourself disenfranchised if you're not able to cast a ballot within 30 minutes? Will you leave? Will you abandon that opportunity? And then will you cast that blame on the city? Adding resources sounds like the easy answer. It's the wrong answer. It's not the election judges who delay the lines. It's the voters. Voters come in long lines, we process them as quickly as possible, and then they get their ballot and they go to one of a handful of spots, and that's where things stop. And then we have one tabulator, and it gets there and they stop. So adding resources sounds like a really easy solution to that, and isn't per se. I think it would depend on the demographics, the population, the turnout, how much early balloting has had an impact on reducing election day turnout, how much same-day registration there is on each precinct. So each precinct has its own unique profile, and I am not the expert at that. Tim Schwartz has taken the lead on that for multiple years. And so you saw me kind of look when you asked this question. I looked at him. I don't have the final say on that, but I look to Tim as our expert. And although Tim and I can disagree a lot and frequently do, I think he knows those precincts better than I do. And he's in touch, not only with your offices, but he's in touch with the election judges who work there and our head judges who have been in these precincts for many years. We offered several years ago, and Tim produced them, layout maps for each precinct that we thought would maximize the use of the space. And we got a lot of feedback from judges going, no, you don't know the space as well as us. This is how we're going to lay it out. Go back and redraw the map the way we told you. And the entire team under Grace's leadership is very responsive to feedback from election judges. So if Tim has connected with, Mr. Schwartz has connected with you and he's giving you that feedback, I trust what he's saying, and I trust your knowledge of your ward and your community better than mine. My feedback is just to say adding resources isn't always the easiest answer. A lot of it's doing, excuse me, due to the voters and how quickly that line can build up.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm trying to really get my mind around the timeline. So is it accurate to say that the presidential primary in 2020 is on March 3rd? And so if we enact the 46 days of early voting, folks could be voting as early as January 2020 for their presidential primary.
Mr. Chair, to Councilmember Cano, on your screen now is that very, very high-level timeline. So it starts with the presidential nominating primary on March 3rd. Backing up from that 46-day early voting period starts January 17th. So starting on January 17th, which is a Friday, we will be welcoming voters for the first opening engagement in that primary, and that will continue every day through March 2nd. And then, of course, the big event, the presidential nominating primary, will be Tuesday, March 3rd, also known as Super Tuesday.
So in your perspective, anticipating the timeline for the rest of 2019, when do you expect the council might have to make a decision on this issue of precincts, knowing that January is like when things are happening?
Right. So through the chair, Councilmember Cano, obviously sooner is better than later. Mr. Schwartz every year visits all of our precincts and does on-site inspections and looks at those places and is in contact with those facilities, several of which might have construction projects or not be available to us. So we are just now in the process, and as he's reaching out to your offices to talk about sites that we've used that aren't available or sites that might be better or preferable and our reasonings for that, that's happening now. We would look to bring back a report within the next quarter or so to bring the next level of updates to you, which would possibly include some recommendations about precincts. In all instances, before the end of the year, the council has to vote on the precincting plan and all the polling places for next year. So we have until your last meeting in December. Obviously, we want that sooner in order to get that information out to voters. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Real quick, I wanted to ask one question about the increase in precincts. Is there any sort of, do you have any history on why the decrease in precincts happened? I know that whoever made that decision probably couldn't anticipate the uptick in population, but they definitely could made the decision to decrease the precincts. What was the original reasoning for that, if you know?
Mr. Chair, when I came in 2010, we were still in the business of cutting precincts, and the only reason we were cutting precincts is budget. The city was going through some very stark budgetary realities dealing with cuts from the state and LGA, and because of those, all departments were required to cut to the bone. And in the elections office, we had at that time only 4 people, so it was either cut 25% of that team or cut precincts, and precincts were the easier cut to make, even though there clearly has been and was impact on voters. Highlighted for those who were here with me, and at the time the chair of my elections committee was Councilmember Gordon, and he'll recall that the 2012 presidential election had extended long lines, wait times in some precincts as long as 6 hours, and that was in part due to 2 functions: too few precincts and same-day registration. We've corrected for that since then, but there is still a gap.
Thank you for that. And just want to highlight or emphasize how Councilmember Gordon mentioned, we have kind of one half of this elections process. It's on the candidates to do their work. But us and our opponents, even before we were in office, all benefited from the great work of you and your team and the availability of elections to our constituents. And so I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for this presentation. Seeing no further questions from colleagues, I will move to receive and file this report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Great, the ayes have it. And for our final item, we have a request to confirm the city clerk's appointment of Jackie Hansen to the position of Assistant City Clerk. Mr. Carl.
Mr. Chair, it's my privilege to submit my appointment of Jackie Hansen to the position of Assistant City Clerk. Certainly, Ms. Hansen needs no formal introduction to this group. She's been a member of the clerk's office for more than 33 years now. She was here prior to the arrival of all of us. She was here to welcome us, teach us, guide us, and when the inevitable errors occur, and they do, to correct us, most often without even calling our attention to the matter. In her usual calm and confident way, Ms. Hansen has been a leader in the clerk's office, holding steady under the tenure of 4 different city clerks: Lyle Schwarzkopf, Mary Keefe, Steve Risteban, and most recently me. And as they have come and gone, she has remained, here to train in the next city clerk and the next city council. As each of you knows, Ms. Hansen is well qualified for her role. She's certified as a professional municipal clerk, both by the Minnesota Clerks and Finance Officers Association and by the International Institute of Municipal Clerks. She's been a leader at AFSCME Local 9. Since 2014, she's been acting in an interim capacity, directly leading the team of clerks who serve this body, who publish its official acts, who guide its procedures, and who ensure the public has access to its decisions. I find it interesting that her arrival at the city was the result of a recommendation from a former charter commissioner who recognized in her the spirit of a true public servant. I know the committee would appreciate hearing from her, so I will invite her up, and then I will close by asking for your confirmation of my appointment of Ms. Hansen to this position.
Thank you, Ms. Hansen.
Thank you, Chair Ellison and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. Today, I'm very grateful and excited to take on this new leadership position. I have been blessed for the past 34 years to work for the city, all in the clerk's office, supporting the city's policymakers in the legislative process. I would like to recognize the outstanding work of our legislative and administrative staff team, namely Irene Casper, Peggy Munchak, Kelly Giesler, Ken Daler, Sybil McMillan, Colleen Peltier, Sue Quinto, and Anita Roby. Also, I would like to express my appreciation to Casey for his support and the council and mayor for your confidence in my ability to lead this division. Thank you.
Thank you. Do my colleagues have any questions? Ms. Hansen, it sounds like this is long overdue, and congratulations and thank you for your service. So I am happy to move to confirm the city clerk's appointment of Jackie Hansen to the appointed position of Assistant City Clerk. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, the ayes have it. With no further business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.